We're just going to have a conversation for the next few minutes. Good evening. I have the distinct privilege of moderating this next session on leadership and social change. I still can't believe I let Jane talk me into this. That's the first point. But there were a couple of highlights from earlier today that I wanted to just get us to rethink. And one was from Jane when she showed the picture on the agenda brochure, and I think the young girl's name was Naira. And so just let's keep Naira in mind as we go forward. And the second was from Luis Arbor, the notion of to tell the truth. And so tonight, for the next few minutes, I've got the distinct privilege, as I said, to introduce a couple of real leaders in the field who are going to tell us the truth. My name is David Keller. I am the president of the Keller Family Foundation, and we focus on human rights and support of social entrepreneurs. And that's all I'm going to say about me. I would like to welcome our webcast audience, if there's anyone still awake, who will join us remotely somewhere around the world. This session, the plan was to consider not just the obvious importance of leadership in affecting social change, but also the promise and challenge of leadership when challenging the status quo. So with me tonight are two compelling speakers who will challenge and hopefully inspire you. First, to my left is Geeta Gupta, who has more than 20 years of experience in women's health and in leading a global authority, is a leading global authority on women's role in development programs. Ms. Gupta, who if you missed the earlier session today is going to thrill you. Ms. Gupta recently joined the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and she didn't tell Bill she was even coming here tonight, as a senior fellow at their Global Development Program, prior to which, and hopefully she'll share some of her long experience, prior to which she served for more than a decade as president of the International Center for Research on Women. Next, we have Jawad Aslam, who I met through Acumen Fund, and he has been a pioneer in low-income housing in Pakistan, first as a project manager for an organization called Saban, and then after that, working as a community-based low-income housing project for 2 years. Mr. Aslam joined the Acumen Fund Fellows program and started to work on a for-profit business model for the base of the pyramid to scale in Pakistan, launching what he's affectionately called the Ansaar Management Company, and that's about a 2-year project at this stage. So I'm going to get out of the way for a while and join me in thanking our two speakers, and I think we'll turn it over first to you, Jawad, to tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. Thank you all for taking the time and energy to stay this late. When I started thinking about leadership and social change and what it really takes, I thought about the dimensions of leadership that are really pushed to the limit depending upon where you are and what you're doing. So in about October 2005, my wife and I packed up and left one of the most dangerous cities in the US. That's the city that had 2 famous TV shows come out of it. One is called Homicide, and the other is The Wire. So we left Baltimore in hopes of a safer place, and we moved to Pakistan. We really didn't realize what we were getting into, but as we landed in Pakistan, I happened to come upon an investment of the Acumen Fund that was focusing on low-income housing. And I took on the role of project manager there. In the role of project manager, one of the basic concepts that Saiban was focusing on that really appealed to me was that aside from looking at basic parameters of financial sustainability and being affordable for the low-income housing segment, which is people earning between $100 and $200 a month, we started to focus on 2 other parameters that are generally ignored when we talk about low-income housing. The first is to really figure out how we can filter out speculators when we talk about this segment and genuinely get in people who are really trying to or really deserve this low-income housing subsidy. The second is that if somehow magically you're able to filter out speculators and investors, how do you ensure that 5 years from now, when you drive by this housing development, that you can proudly say that this is a development that you made and it has not turned into a slum or a ghetto? So the two S's are speculators, avoiding speculators, and avoiding slums. And so that was a basic concept of how we as developers would go into a new community and stay invested for a period of 5 years. So granted, working in a developing country such as Pakistan, there's the given challenges. Two quick examples of challenges that we used to face is government bureaucracy and corruption. Something that would normally take 2 months to get some sort of regulatory approvals took us over 2 years. Because we refused to pay bribes. And then the second thing that we really face in terms of challenges and requiring a lot of persistence and a lot of collaboration with the community was really building trust within the lower income segments, because in Pakistan and a lot of the developing world, they're the ones that get the raw end of the deal. So when you find that the lower income segment does not trust you, there is some way you have to figure out how you can convince them that you will follow through with your promise. Now, these were the general challenges that I faced, but the biggest challenge by far that I faced was something very personal on June 9th of 2009. I was living in Lahore, commuting to, my wife and I were actually living in Islamabad. And my wife works with UNICEF as a water and sanitation engineer. And she was working with the IDPs at the time in the northern areas of Pakistan. And I was working in Lahore. And on June 9th, she had to do a site visit to one of the IDP camps. And normally she comes back by the evening. I called her at 8 p.m. at night to see what happened and how the day was. And she told me that she had to stay over in Peshawar because of, it got a little too late. So she was eating dinner with Anna from Germany, one of her colleagues, and Percy from the Philippines at the Pearl Continental in Peshawar. And this was around 8 p.m. So I said goodnight to her and said I'll talk to you in the morning. At around 10:30 p.m., I got a phone call from my wife, and in a very calm voice, she said to me, the PC, the Pearl Continental, just had a bomb, and I'm fine, but I cannot find Anna and I cannot find Percy. So I hung up the phone, and we stayed in touch back and forth, and about an hour and a half later, she called me and said that they located Anna. She had broken her knee, and she was going to be medevaced out of the country in 24 hours. And we were going back and forth, just talking, and I somehow dozed off. And when I woke up, I had a text message, and it had 2 words on it. And 2 words were, Percy died. And it took me a good 5 minutes to really pull myself together and figure out how I'm going to talk to my wife. And when I did call her and we started talking about what happened and how they found Percy in her bed in the hotel and she had instantly died, she also said in a very soft voice to me that, Jawad, pray for me, I'm having complications. And at that time I realized that I had completely forgotten that my wife was 6 weeks pregnant. And it had been 13 years and since we had been married, and 1 miscarriage, and this was the first time she had gotten pregnant, and now she started having complications. And the next 2 days you can imagine how they were. We were waiting for the blood test to see if the baby was going to survive or what the situation was. And it was during those 2 days that I had to really ask myself some serious questions about, do I have what it takes to stay in this country? Or, is it really worth it? And what if I had lost my wife? What if I lose my daughter? Now, God was very kind to us, and God has been very kind that we have a daughter, beautiful daughter, who's 4 months old, and she made it through that process. But as I was asking myself these questions, I was working with this low-income housing community that was in a very nascent stage. And the answers to these questions were actually coming out in this community. And I want to just share some of those aspects to you. And I just want to share one specific story, which was about the sectarian strife in the community and how we overcame that sectarian strife. So what I had realized essentially was that in order for me to really understand this community, I need to move onto the site and start living with the community. So about a year back, I actually shifted on, built a house, and started living with this lower income segment, as there were about 1,000 people living there at this stage. And so as we started establishing the community, one of the events that happened was that during the month of fasting for the Muslims, actually, before I get into that, I just want to give the background of sectarian strife in the Muslim world. We all know from Iraq, the civil war that happened between the Shias and the Sunnis. It's very strong and very predominant. This sectarian issue usually leads to violence and many times leads to death and the likes. So what had happened was that on the 27th of the month of fasting, we had a night vigil in the mosque. And after a while, I got tired and I went back to my house and I went to sleep. About 1 a.m., my cousin comes running into the house and says, "You need to come to the mosque, there's a serious problem." So the mosque was about 1,000 feet away, so I'm half asleep, I'm walking to the mosque, and as I get closer, there's about 40 men who are screaming at the top of their lungs. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'll go and see if I can calm these guys down. As I get closer, I realize that one of the guys has a baseball bat. And I've never seen a baseball bat in my life in Pakistan, and this is the first time I see it. And so I disregard the baseball bat till in front of my eyes, I see one of the guys take the baseball bat and connect with somebody's legs. Then I woke up and I said, this is serious. And I had to grab the guy and push him to the side and try to calm the situation down. But it had escalated to that level. And after that, the community leaders and representatives got together and said, let's come together and have a community meeting. And so about 60, 70 people came together in the mosque, mostly the males of the community. And they had this basic realization that we need to have a representative committee. So we basically got Shias, we got Sunnis, we got multiple sects of Sunnis to come together and represent their portions of the community in the mosque committee. And every week thereafter, for about 6 months, we started having meetings on a weekly basis. The first meeting took 2 hours just to decide who will lead prayer. So we had a very difficult task ahead of us. And at the end of a period of about 6 months, we had everybody praying together. And we had basically solved all the problems that existed in terms of the animosity between the different sects in the community. Lo and behold, as we all know, there's always a knucklehead in the community. So there was a knucklehead who said, I don't like the status quo. So he actually brought up an issue to instigate one of the other sects. And as you all know as well, that blasphemy is a big issue in Islam, especially blasphemy against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And we know that from Denmark and the issues with the cartoons of the Prophet easily leads to death. That's sort of a clear case, especially in Pakistan where people get really riled up. So he made a comment which was where he was accused of being blasphemous. Now, this news spread like wildfire in that community and the surrounding villages. And the news came back to him that he had a store in the community. He said, if you open your store up in the morning, we're going to set it on fire. So I wasn't in the community that day, so they called me and said, it's a serious issue. You need to come and see if we can resolve it. The community members themselves got together that night and said they managed to control everybody in the community. They called all the members together at night, and they all sat in the mosque. And before we started the meeting, my role was just as a facilitator. Before we actually started the meeting, one of the members said, I don't think we should be doing this in the mosque. And the reason was because they knew that this is going to get into cursing, it's going to get into a fight, as it did 8 months ago. Now, after 90 minutes of discussion, no one yelled, no one cursed, and I was actually afraid that somebody was going to pull a gun. I honestly was afraid someone was going to pull a gun because that's just the emotions that get tapped into in this stage. But they all peacefully resolved the issue based upon dialogue, based upon collaboration, based upon understanding that we have to actually live together in this community. And we have to overlook these ideological or theological issues. And they were so happy after 90 minutes that something which is very common in Pakistan and in India is that they said, you know, there's such we handle this in such a beautiful manner that we should distribute sweets amongst the entire community. And these kind of things, this is just one example of how something which is so fundamental in the Muslim world, which is sectarian strife and sectarian violence, that this community of people who are earning 12,000 rupees, which is basically $150 a month, were able to sit together and resolve their problems. And so my thoughts were at this stage that, you know, what's easy for me is to pack up my bags and move back to Baltimore, move back to the States and get a job and be comfortable. And that's the easy part. The hard part is really to ignore the fact that 90 million people in Pakistan, 90 million people in Pakistan fit the same profile as these people that are living in this community, who have been able to bring their problems together and solve them in a pretty revolutionary manner. And that is something which really hit home to me as to what my calling is or what I should be doing as a facilitator, that I need to stick around. If I wasn't here, maybe this issue would not be resolved in the way that it was. So in the end, sort of a closing thought or a final thought is that something that I have realized in the last 5 years living in Pakistan is that as with investing, wherever there is high financial risk, there's potential for high return. I've realized that in places where there is a high prevalence of social crises, that there is a tremendous opportunity for social return. Thank you.
Geeta, risk and reward. Tell us your story.
What to follow up that with? That was a profound story. Well, I grew up in India. My story is the reverse because I grew up in India, spent the first 30 years of my life there, studied there, had my entire education there in a very gender equitable home. But on a daily basis, confronted what India is well known for, which is its potential for economic growth, as much as it's known for the enormous and hideous inequities between women and men and between the rich and the poor. And living in India, that's what confronts you on a daily basis. And I've always said that being an educated woman in India, if you were educated and growing up in India, how could you not have an anger in your belly about those inequities? So for me, it didn't seem like a choice. It certainly didn't seem my career choice. It didn't seem like anything to be applauded. It was to be expected. Because the reality was that India had all the potential and all the possibilities staring it right in its face, and yet somehow we held each other back. through the caste system, through class, and through gender barriers. And so my career has been to advance what, for those of you who are in that world, to advance MDG 3, the Millennium Development Goal 3, which is to promote gender equality and to empower women. And in the past 3 decades of working on that issue, what I've realized is that it requires fundamental social change, that it requires a sort of a shifting in the balance of power between women and men, and that can be done through piecemeal rectification by trying to figure out and identify what are the resources that give individuals power in society. So we know their income and economic assets, land, credit. We know it's education, information. We know, as we just heard, it's services and technologies. We know it's social capital. And we know it's voice, being able to speak up about your own destiny and make certain choices. And you can, and we have all been, trying to implement and use each of those levers for change. But really, to bring about a shift in the balance of power is going to require political mobilization and political change. It is about a political process. And any one of these levers or all of them combined may make that political change happen. But my experience has shown that it's leadership that is going to political leadership that makes that possible. But not political leadership in the way we typically talk about it, which is heads of state or ministers. Political, elected, appointed, recruited leaders. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about leaders within communities, leaders in community-based organizations. I'm talking about leaders who don't even know they're leaders, but who are pioneers and who buck the tide, who try and show that this is not, even if there is a severe social sanction associated with this act, I still feel it's worthy of doing. Those are the leaders that we often forget when we discuss leadership and social change. And those are the leaders who have, over my career, been my inspiration. Some of them are famous, and you've heard of them. Ela Bhatt, I'm sure many of you have heard of, who founded the Self-Employed Women's Association in Ahmedabad in India, who was my inspiration growing up in India, who unionized the most marginalized community of women, poor rag pickers, and gave them a voice. And now Seva is this enormous organization that is not just a microfinance organization, but much, much more. And most importantly, it's a political organization that fights for the rights of those marginalized women and fights against poverty. The other is Wangari Maathai in Kenya, who I read about, who established the Green Belt movement, which was an environmental movement for poor women, run by poor women, again, a political movement. But other examples out of women in communities who, through my work, I had the privilege of meeting and getting to know. And I'll tell you just one story about a norm, a social norm, because this is about normative change, if you want to change the roles and responsibilities of women and men and what they perceive to be their obligations and their duties. It's a story about age of marriage. Now, age of marriage, for most of us who work in the field, is one of those seemingly intractable, immutable, entrenched social norm. We have a law in India, and yet in the developing world today, 7 out of 10 girls get married before the age of 15 in certain parts of the developing world. In India, 50% of women get married before the age of 15. So there's a law, and then there's the social norm. And the organization that I used to lead, the International Center for Research on Women, decided to figure out what will it take to change this social norm. And all of the research that we did basically showed that it was motivated by poverty, but mostly it was motivated by a normative context in which if any one mother delayed her daughter's marriage, that girl might be without a husband because all the young men would be married off, or the daughter would be faced with severe social censure and ostracization. So to avoid that, most people sort of stuck with the norm. It so happened that a community-based organization in Maharashtra, India, came to us and said, we work with adolescent girls in a rural area, it's called Pachod, and we'd like you to come help us figure out what we can do to delay the age of marriage for adolescent girls, because we find that because they're married at the age in that particular community, the average age of marriage was between 15 and 16. And because they get married that young, it sort of blocks their educational opportunities, blocks their economic potential, increases the rate of infant mortality, puts them at risk of maternal morbidity and mortality, it puts them at risk of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections, makes them victims of domestic violence, a range of negative options. And more fundamental than that, it is that point in a girl's life where once the trajectory shifts in the negative direction, it's almost impossible to shift it back. So if you could delay the age of marriage, if you could keep her in school a year longer, if you could increase her economic potential, it would make a huge difference. Well, we were interested in the issue. This community-based organization was facing it on a local level. They invited us to come in. We did the analysis and found out, interestingly, that all the girls said they really would like to be married at the age of 22 or 23. And all the mothers said, we would like our girls to be married by 21 or 22, right? Every family that we interviewed in a representative sample in the community said the same thing. None of them knew that their neighbors felt the same way, right? That was one. The second was a very understandable problem, which was there were no secondary schools anywhere near that village, near that community. So girls were, after primary school, were idle. Like most of us as parents, you never want an adolescent girl or boy to be idle. They get into trouble. And so, you know, what to do? Get them married. Marriage is safe. It'll protect the honor of the family. They'll be safer there. There'll be somebody to keep an eye on her. Perfectly understandable reasons. So we presented the information to the community-based organization who had the interests of the community at heart. They had a rapport with the community. They shared the results in community meetings and said, do you know that most of you want your daughters to get married at 22? We don't have the resources to set up a secondary school, but we're going to set up a life skills program for your young girls between ages 11 to 17. We're going to teach them how to use a bus ticket, how to set up a bank account, how to read a train, railway sort of schedule, how to set, do various things, plus some information on health, nutrition, some basic information about the geography and politics of India, etc. It'll be a day-long program. For 1 year, that particular curriculum was offered. You'd be interested to know that a very small percentage of the young girls in that community actually attended. Only 300, I forget what the total number was, but it was a small percentage. Those mothers were the pioneers. Those were the leaders I'm talking about who said, I'm going to give it a shot. Even though the others aren't doing it, I'm going to send my daughter there. What was interesting was that after 1 year of that program, actually 1.5 years of that program, the average age of marriage shifted by a year upward. Not only among the 300 who attended the curriculum, attended the school, but among that entire community. So something happened. Something happened. There was a norm that seemed to be there forever. It was causing all these negative consequences that apparently most families could see. Yet it took a little shift and courage. The courage of a few handful of people who were the pioneers, who had the leadership qualities to say, I can make this happen. And repeatedly, when you work in communities, you see that people will put themselves at risk slightly for the betterment of the next generation, their kids or their families, and others will then sort of be encouraged by that. That's the leadership that I would like us to focus on when we talk about leadership. It's the leadership of community-based organizations, of the affected communities, of the very communities who hold on to the status quo because they fear the consequences if they shifted. If they can be facilitated, facilitation I think is key, to be leaders in their community, if they can be resourced, you'll see successes that you would never have otherwise anticipated. The most classic and well-known example, and often cited example, is the Fourth World Women's Conference in Beijing, or the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, where women's organizations from all over the world, it was an international women's movement that put reproductive rights on the agenda internationally, that made women's rights human rights, and made political leaders accept that fact. How did that happen? That happened because philanthropists, foundations, funded grassroots women's organizations and funded them to convene, to network, to set agendas, to think strategically, resourced them, and then left it to them. Didn't say what the agenda should be that they should advance. So my message to you today is that that leadership is created and fostered by investing in organizations and strengthening them. But that requires, it's a risky investment. Not all of those investments will have a return. It's a long-term investment. But once it succeeds, it provides you a base, a foundation of capacity and institutions that can sustain whatever other investments you make in those countries. And so I'm making a pitch for it because you'll be shocked to see, when you see the data and the numbers, the way in which funding for grassroots women's organizations has dropped since the Cairo and Beijing agendas were sealed, everything was done. And all of a sudden, the big foundations pulled out the money from those organizations, and everybody now was into results and into funding particular models, into scaling up. But in all of that, all of which is very good, it's good stuff, I'm supportive of it, it's what we always did at ICAW too. But while doing that, if you don't build institutions and sustain them at the community level, within countries, and if you do not build capacity, forevermore we will be sitting in the West, sending people down to the developing world to say, come, let me help you. Here's a product, here's a solution, here's this or here's that. I was shocked in a recent HIV/AIDS meeting in which we were discussing national strategies for HIV/AIDS prevention, when I was told by an AIDS director of a particular country in Africa that they could not apply for a Global Fund grant, the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and Malaria, because the international consultant who helped them write previous grant proposals was the one who also wrote proposals for 5 other countries. And in that round, he was too busy traveling between countries to make a visit to their country to write the proposal. And I said, what have we created? What is this dependency we're creating, and who are we funding? So I say this as an ex-president of a US nonprofit, and there are other presidents of nonprofits here in the audience who I know will agree with me, that ultimately all of us as leaders of our nonprofits would like to have an exit strategy. Help us. Help us and hold us to the standard of and indicators that prove that we have built capacity and built institutions with the partners who we work in the developing world. Don't just expect from us results in terms of sectoral outcomes. Ask us who we partnered with and what we left behind, and hold us accountable for that. Because without that, we'll be in business forever. We'll all grow, and we have, right? Whereas the organizations we work with at the community level will forever be dependent on us. And that's not my vision. That shouldn't be our vision.
I'll try to tee up a couple of questions, but pretty much you guys can go anywhere you want on the answers. Vision without execution can be an illusion, and execution without vision is a waste of time. Jawad, what's your vision for the work that you're working on, and what do you spend most of your working time on?
Well, the company that I launched, which is the name of Ansaar Management Company. Ansaar in Arabic actually means facilitation. And so that's one of our visions, is to be able to facilitate communities to develop in Pakistan in the manner that we want to stay engaged in community for a period of 5 years. The real vision is to come to a point where we are building an X amount of houses per year to help solve the backlog of housing in Pakistan. Right now, the backlog in Pakistan is about 7 million units. So on the one personal level, it's what Ansaar Management Company can do, which is, quite frankly, very little. At best, we'll do 10,000 units, we'll do 20,000 units on an annual basis, when the reality is that that backlog is increasing by 200,000 each year. So the problem is just getting worse and worse. What we have started to do and try to do is really catalyze this space within Pakistan to try to show other developers that, look, here's a model for low-income housing, here's a way that it's sustainable, here are the issues that we need to be considering, and why don't you come and join hands with us, and let's try to really scale this up and replicate this within Pakistan. And we've made some serious progress on that the government of Pakistan has started to engage with us to see how they can work and replicate this model of AMC.
Geeta, you just started a new assignment with the Gates Foundation. What's your long-term vision for this assignment? What are you going to spend your time on?
Well, it's a wonderful opportunity for me. I should just back up before talking about that and say to you that, you know, I was saying earlier to you that we went the reverse direction. Yeah? You were born and grew up in Baltimore and moved to Pakistan. I was born and grew up in India, and I moved to the US. I actually happened to come to the US because of my husband, who's here tonight, who got a job, you know, in the US, and we thought we were coming for 2 years, and that's how we came. And soon after, he kept getting extended. I was looking for, you know, where can I do the kind of work I'm interested in. All roads pointed to the International Center for Research on Women. And so I got employed there as a research assistant initially, stayed on and grew, worked with them. It's the only job I held in the US till 4 days ago. When I left ICAW, the reason we stayed on, and the reason, in fact, that my husband resigned from a very lucrative, high-powered career in India, was that when he was finally called back to India after his assignment in the US, was when I got confirmed and got full-time employment at ICAW. And I had said to him several days that week that that's so exciting, because I realize now, sitting in the US, that I can influence US foreign assistance and US foreign philanthropy, which can affect so many women around the world, whereas in India, I was doing research to try and influence the Indian government only. And that platform to me seemed like such an incredibly large and wonderfully powerful platform. And so he resigned. And we stayed on for my career. So boy, that was some pressure on me. I had no option but then to become president of ICRW. And so for me, really, one of the reasons for thinking that this opportunity with the Gates Foundation is such a magnificent opportunity for me is because, yet again, here's an impactful foundation. Here's a foundation with a benefactor who has a fabulous vision, and to be some small part of it, to be able to be a fly on the wall. I'm a senior fellow. I'm not a staff member in the traditional way. To be a fly on the wall and watch how the foundation works, and how you can make a difference through this kind of philanthropy is what I very much wanted to see. So it gives me that opportunity, while it also gives me the time to think about what I want to do next, because this is a time-bound fellowship. But it's an enormous opportunity for me to be on the global development side and to be able to see many sectors simultaneously, and to see women as one piece of all of that, as an integrated piece, rather than be in an organization that's focusing only on women.
Mm-hmm. How would people describe your leadership characteristics? If I had an opportunity to ask people that have worked for you, Jawad, how would they describe you and your leadership skills?
This is getting embarrassing now.
Yeah.
We'll turn the lights down.
Stubborn, is the best, especially in Pakistan. I think the only word that I can really think of working in the developing world, working in Pakistan in the context that I explained to all of you is really persistence. And that's all I would really like to say, that persistence is the thing that has really gotten me to where I am right now and given me the successes that I have, because there's been plenty of challenges that have come up, and giving up is very easy. And it's that persistence against people who are asking for bribes. It's persistence against some of the challenges which I shared earlier. It's persistence even with the community when they're insisting on their theological issues and saying that what we're saying is correct and what everybody else is saying is wrong. So persistence is really the one word.
Geeta, you've had a whole range of people undoubtedly have worked for you. Pick one out and say how would they describe you?
Oh, what should I say? I think that the fact that I'm a single issue person, you know, I had women's inequality and in the context of poverty was what I wanted to have as my career, and I think people, you know, realize that that's my central focus, and you know, there's no ambiguity about that. So I think that's a good thing to have, to bring a team around you and have everybody focus on the same issue. I've enjoyed that enormously. I love working with people. I work best in teams, so I think that that's also helped enormously to make ICAW sort of. But I have to say that, you know, for years it was kind of fun to be the passionate outsider. You know, we always thought of ourselves as a small organization nipping at the ankles of those big guys, you know, getting them to pay attention to women. So it's kind of blah now, you know, because everybody talks about women as being important and girls. It was fun this morning, this panel in the afternoon, where they didn't mention women, so I got to fight again. But it's, you know, because it's sort of interesting how all the stars are aligned in the right direction now. It's almost like all the efforts of all the organizations that work on women in many ways have succeeded, at least at the discourse level. So in the policy discourse now, whether it's the Secretary of State in the US or the Prime Minister of India or, you know, the President of Tanzania, you know, all of a sudden maternal mortality, you know, women farmers in food insecurity and all of these issues, people are talking about women and girls. The Nike Foundation is working on girls, you know. It's just, Goldman Sachs has a 10,000 women program, you know. ExxonMobil is thinking about women and technologies to economically
They may have a few
empower
other
them.
problems right
I know
now.
they do, but it's just, it's a different time. It's a window of opportunity. So right now, I feel that if we don't quickly focus on the how-to and show how it can be done or what we know of how it can be done, share that quickly, and diffuse that knowledge, I'm really anxious the window of opportunity would close. So the opportunity to integrate what we know into all of the issues that we've talked about this morning, so how do women and girls fit into each of these issues, and what can be their role, and how can we strengthen them? That's the next challenge, and before that window closes. So I hope that my leadership will help keep that window open a little longer till we can get the job done.
Are you optimistic? Are we at a point of
I'm very optimistic right now. I really am. I think that we have the data. We have the evidence of what works. We have indicators for some of the most complicated social issues that we previously did not. It's a question of letting people know that that exists and should be used. And I think the convincing of this is an important issue. I think we're past that now. It's not about the why and the what, it's more about the how. Mm-hmm. And the how, more learning on the how will only come as more of you invest in those solutions and then examine how they work. And one of those solutions is actually getting women's organizations to thrive, not just survive. Mm-hmm. Very important.
Jawad, what's your level of optimism these days, and what's your sort of time frame for the work that you're on?
Time frame is as long as my wife lets me stay in Pakistan. I have a lot of optimism because I entered into Pakistan as an average Joe nobody, no contacts, didn't know what I was doing, what I was going to do. And now, exactly 5 years later, we are impacting policy in the country. We started off with a project that was 500 units that Acumen Fund initially started to support. And now we're talking about 5 to 7 developers coming in, and each of them saying we want to do 7,000 to 10,000 units. And all in a span of 5 years. So very optimistic.
We've only got a few minutes left, so I like to wrap up early. So on behalf of the Global Philanthropy Forum, I'd like to thank both of our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
They probably need a minute or two to mic up, or maybe they don't need mics. They're an a cappella talent, so we'll see. But anyway, next up on the stage is an a cappella group called Vocal Motion 6, who have come all the way from Namibia to perform for us tonight. Now, how they overcame the volcano, we'll let that be for discussion later up.
Direct flight from Johannesburg to...
They made it somehow. But their music promotes a living positive campaign that teaches young people how to make good choices as a preventive tool against the spread of HIV/AIDS. Their brand of leadership is to use their artistic talent for social good. And one little reminder, tomorrow we start at 9 a.m., which is why I wanted to end on time. But please welcome and enjoy Vocal Motion 6. Thank you. Thanks so much. That was perfect.